Okay, so welcome to the deep dive. Today we're going to be looking at something pretty big. Uh, Apple's response to the new tariffs on EU auto and agricultural imports that just hit on April 1st, 2025.
Yeah, big day.
Yeah, trying to figure out,
Yeah.
what does this actually mean for Apple going forward? And then also, zoom out a little bit, what does this mean for the wider tech world as we head into the rest of 2025 and beyond?
Absolutely.
So we got a couple things to help us out here. Obviously, we've been following all the Apple news very closely, but we're also going to be taking some insights from a pretty influential book, I guess we could say, The Innovator's Dilemma by Clayton M. Christensen. And this is actually a book that Tim Cook himself has recommended. So yeah, figured it's a good place to start.
Yeah, no, it's a great framework for thinking about this kind of stuff. So, like, at its core, the innovator's dilemma is all about explaining why even these massively successful companies, these huge companies, can trip up. And so Christensen's idea is that they get so focused on what he calls sustaining innovations. So it's like making their existing products better for their current customers, right?
Right.
Like that's what they're good at. And they sort of miss out on what he calls disruptive innovations. And those are the ones that create whole new markets, or they appeal to segments that maybe were being overlooked before.
Right. Yeah.
Right. So classic example, and that one that he uses a lot in the book, is the disk drive industry. Back in the day, you had all these established players, and they were all laser focused on these high capacity drives for PCs. That was the market. And so they completely missed the boat on these smaller drives that were needed for, the emerging laptop.
The new thing.
The new thing, exactly. And then all these new companies, they jumped in and they took over those emerging markets.
Yeah, it's that classic thing where you're so focused on what you're doing that you just don't see the change happening until it's right there.
Until it's too late, pretty much.
Yeah. Okay, so how does a 25% tariff on EU imports, and we're hearing that could hike iPhone prices by 10% in Europe, how does that feel like a disruptive challenge for Apple? I mean, they've dealt with tariffs before, haven't they?
They have, yeah. But this one's a little different, I think, because Apple's entire business model, right, it's built on this global supply chain and this idea of premium pricing. Like, the iPhone is expensive, but it's the best. That's kind of the deal.
Right.
But a big price jump like this, it throws a real wrench in that.
Yeah, it certainly makes them a lot less competitive in markets where they were already facing tough competition.
Exactly. So some of the things that they're potentially looking at, like those rumored updates to Health Plus series, or maybe even reconsidering parts of their supply chain, we could see that as them trying to innovate their way out of this disruption.
Right.
So instead of just making the iPhone incrementally better, which is that sustaining innovation, they might be looking at new ways to deliver value.
Yeah, okay. I'm starting to see how this all ties together. So we're hearing the financial hit from all this could be something like $5 billion a year, just from the EU tariffs alone.
Yeah, that's a huge number.
That's huge. So what happens next? I mean, what are they going to do? What are consumers going to see?
Well, the most immediate impact, sadly, is probably going to be those higher prices for European consumers.
Yeah, that's not going to be popular.
No, not at all. And so the big question for Apple is going to be, how do they keep that brand appeal, the whole premium thing, when their flagship product is suddenly noticeably more expensive?
And this is where those new directions, like the Health Plus stuff and the supply chain stuff comes in, right?
Yeah, potentially.
So the Health Plus rumors, let's dig into those a bit. How could making their health and fitness features better be an innovative response to tariffs on physical goods? Because those are two pretty separate things in my mind.
Yeah, that's a good point. It's not an obvious connection. But think of it this way. By investing heavily in services, things like Health Plus Spore, that are less tied to the physical iPhone and its import costs, Apple could be trying to create different reasons for people to stay in their ecosystem.
Right.
Even if the phone itself is more expensive, it's maybe about shifting that value proposition to a different part of their business.
Okay, so less about the hardware, more about the whole package.
Exactly. I mean, price adjustments are always an option, but they risk losing those price-sensitive customers, and they've got to be careful about that.
Yeah, for sure. So there's been, a ton of chatter online, obviously, Exit blowing up about this whole thing. People have a lot of opinions about what Apple should do next.
Yeah.
What are you seeing out there?
Yeah, it's been pretty interesting to watch. You definitely see a lot of concern that higher prices are just going to push some consumers towards, competitors. There are cheaper phones out there, and if the iPhone is suddenly like way more expensive, people might start looking around.
Right.
But at the same time, there's also this argument that this could be the thing that finally pushes Apple to diversify their manufacturing even more,
Okay, interesting.
to reduce their reliance on specific regions, right? Which, in the long run, could actually be a good thing for them.
Makes them less vulnerable to these kinds of shocks in the future.
Exactly.
Yeah, and this isn't just Apple's headache either. I mean, we're looking at potentially like, what, a $50 billion tariff bill for the entire tech industry this year?
Yeah, it's a big number. And Apple's situation, it's kind of a microcosm of the challenge that the whole industry's facing.
Mm.
Innovation now, it's not just about making cooler gadgets or, fancier features.
Yeah.
It's about being able to adapt your entire business model, your supply chains, to navigate this really complex and constantly changing global trade landscape.
And it's really interesting that, Tim Cook himself is the one who recommended this book, The Innovator's Dilemma.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that suggests that, at least at some level, this is something that they're thinking about.
Absolutely. I think his recommendation really underscores a focus on trying to get ahead of these potential disruptions, not just react to them, but anticipate them.
Yeah.
And I think, all the debate that we're seeing online, all the chatter, it really highlights that tension between trying to stay profitable, keep those margins up, but also adapt to these pretty significant external pressures.
It's a tough balancing act. So it feels like Apple's moves following these April 1st tariffs are, they're really highlighting just how deeply intertwined tech and global trade have become. And with the EU tariffs coming in right after literally the next day, April 2nd, it just feels like a really significant moment for the industry.
It does. It's a real turning point. And I think Christensen's framework, it's a really good reminder that even these tech giants, they need to be constantly looking beyond their existing successes and really exploring new avenues if they want to not just survive, but really thrive in the face of all this disruption.
So as Apple is, potentially navigating these tariffs with things like Health Plus and tweaking their supply chain and all that stuff, it really is like a real-world live case study in the innovator's dilemma. Makes you think, right, what are those unexpected disruptions that could be headed our way? And how can we be proactive and innovative so that we don't just survive, but we actually find new opportunities in all of this?
Yeah, a lot to think about.
Lots to think about. All right. Well, thanks for joining us on the Deep Dive.
Thanks for having me.